Hi, I'm Matt Cushman,
And I'm Chris Cushman,
and we are the Star Trek cutaway artists.
and you're listening to Truck Untold.
Hello and welcome to Trek Untold, the Star Trek podcast that goes beyond the stars. I'm your host, Matthew Kaplowitz. This week on the show, I've got brothers who contributed to the Star Trek universe in a very unique way. Chris and Matt Cushman are illustrators who drew some of the most iconic images often seen in the homes of Star Trek fans. They are considered the kings of the cutaway, as their technical illustrations stripped apart the hulls of starships to give us a glimpse of what every deck looks like from inside out. Similar to a blueprint, except it's not just architectural plans, it's every table, every chair, or every object in each room aboard those ships. They've drawn the original Enterprise, as well as the D and the E, the Phoenix from First Contact, the Delta Flyer, Voyager, a Romulan bird of prey, and plenty of other Star Trek ships, as well as vessels from other sci-fi franchises, and much, much more. I never pass up an opportunity to talk art on this podcast and expose you guys out there to the inner workings of how stuff like this gets made. I can't think of anything more unique than these Star Trek cutaways, which if you've never seen before, wow, are you going to be in for a treat today? So stay tuned as Chris and Matt Cushman walk us through their journey through art and illustration and explain how their lavishly detailed technical drawings that have been in the home of so many Star Trek fans for decades get made. And chances are, after you listen to this interview, I wouldn't be shocked if it inspired a few of you out there to pick up one or two of those drawings as well. But before we begin this week's episode, I want to remind you to follow Trek Untold on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Trek Untold, all one word. You can get show updates, check out some fun memes, and let me know what you think about what's going on with the current events in the Star Trek universe. You can also support this show directly on Patreon at patreon.com/TrekUntold, where you can support this show for as little as $2 a month. At higher tiers, you can listen to the shows before they come out, know about my guests well in advance, and even have a chance to ask them questions, get transcripts of these episodes to make sure you get all the info, and more benefits coming soon, including watch parties and live streams. But that's all dependent on more fans like you coming over and letting me know you want to be a part of events like that. If you want some Trek Untold merchandise, check out our store for gear and apparel, including shirts, hats, stickers, water bottles, notebooks, and a whole lot more. New designs will be added throughout the year, so it's always worth taking a peek. Trek Untold also has an Amazon shop where you can peruse everything Star Trek, sci-fi, and geeky on Amazon in one convenient location. If you're looking for a gift for the Trekkie in your life, or maybe want to see some of my favorite non-Star Trek things that you can get for yourself, check out the link for my Amazon shop in the show notes on the audio version and in the description below this video on YouTube. If you're listening to us on iTunes or any other audio platforms that allow for ratings and reviews, please leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review to help out this show. If you're watching it on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to us at youtube.com/TrekUntold and give the video a thumbs up and a comment. All of these things help more people find this show and to continue growing and bringing you awesome guests each and every week. Now, without further ado, let's beam in this week's guest. Computer, access interview file. And welcome back to Trek Untold. And now joining me on the other sides of the screen, we have two guests today who have been called the Masters of the Cutaway. Chances are you have definitely seen their illustrations before, and you possibly own a few of them as well. Today, we're joined by Chris and Matt Cushman. Chris and Matt, how's it going today? Great to have you here.
Good.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I love having artists on the show, and it's not something I can easily have done because, finding a lot of the production art people is such a hard thing to do these days. I love talking art. I went to art school, did the art school experience. I was an illustration person. So it's always fun to talk to you guys, especially, and learn about what you do, because it is such a different thing compared to what of the other guests we've had on this show here. So let's just jump on in right now. And I'd love to ask you guys the first question I ask all my guests. And that's, what's your earliest memory of Star Trek? And I'm going to start with you, Chris. You're the older brother. You get the first go here.
Old guy in the room, yeah. I'd like to say that it was the mid 60s. I'm sure that I did watch it because I know that my dad watched it, but I would say probably more accurately, was probably in the very early 70s. It was syndicated to WKBD Channel 50 in Detroit, and it played every day. So that's when I consciously remember, like, just becoming authoritarian about the TV set at 5 o'clock. Like, my sister used to hate me she's a Star Trek fan now, but she used to hate me because I would force the 5 o'clock Star Trek thing. So yeah, I would say then.
How about you, Matt? Same story?
Well, I was the syndication kid, so it was one of those things where I don't know what time slot it was on. I couldn't tell you any of the information, but I do remember watching Star Trek like after dinner on a Sunday or something like that, and I think it was still Channel 50 out of Detroit, if my memory serves me right. And it was I do remember Chris left the house for college in 79. So it was the mid to late 70s that we had to watch Star Trek at 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night or something like that. And I'm definitely a Star Wars kid. In the late 70s, I definitely watched Next Generation because I was already, I don't know, preconditioned to do so. Between old Star Trek and Star Wars and Battlestar Galactica and Space 1999, all those. That was another show that Chris had to watch religiously on the TV. I was just there through being there, I had no choice per se, but that kind of stuff just interests me. So I found it interesting. I don't know how hardcore of a fan I am of Space 1999, or I did like Battlestar Galactica a lot. I remember wanting to watch that show. I'm 11 years younger, so I never got to see it originally aired in the 60s.
But it is kind of cool that it basically was a generational thing, and it's like, one brother's watching it when it's first airing, next one's seeing it in syndication. That's kind of like the full Star Trek picture in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, our parents never really said we couldn't, once we turned it on, it was never like, well, we have to turn this off or something else. I think they kind of liked it enough to enjoy it, even though they may have seen it a million times. It probably helped having parents that were, let that happen.
Now, were your parents involved in the arts, or what do they do for a living?
Mom was involved in choir in high school. Like, the high school she went to had a extremely significant choir. I think that they had. Mom was definitely the most artistic of them. She also did flower arranging and stuff like that. But I think later in life, my dad has a creative side to him as well. He built some furniture and stuff like that, but we're the only illustrators and drawers in the family.
So did you guys both know you wanted to be artists for a living? Like, what was the plan for little Chris and little Matt?
Yeah, ever since I was in kindergarten, I caught the bug really, really early. When I was 10, I won my first art contest at Kennedy Square in downtown Detroit. And they gave it, I got a book, an art book. I can't remember who the artist was. And a cash prize. And I used the cash prize to pay for art supplies. And my dad got me art lessons by a guy that ran a sign company. His name was John Banner. And those were my first art lessons. And that was around 10.
How about you, Matt? Were you kind of following your brother's footsteps, or was that like your way towards art, or how did you find your way into it?
Well, I was always also an artistic kid in school, but I think Chris was drawing when I was, 4 or 5 years old. I would see the things Chris would be drawing and thought that was cool. And I'm the kind of kid that grew up just wanting to do things that were cool. that I felt were cool, I should say. And I thought, well, I like that. I want to do that too, So I think it helped seeing, having an artist in the house. My earliest recollection is he did some sort of hawk or eagle picture, pen and ink, and I thought that was neat, so I copied it. But I've always liked drawing, and I was one of those kids in school that in high school, I had a low grade point average. And that didn't happen in college. I had a pretty good grade point in college, but I didn't, art I felt like was my calling and probably my biggest strength. So I ran with it.
Yeah, it's always interesting hearing like what artists drew when they were younger as opposed to like what they're drawing today when they get older or, more professional, whatever, into their field. Like for me, I was copying comic book pages and eventually I was like doing the manga because, I was in that era of the 90s where the manga phase was happening. So everybody was drawing the big eyes and the lines under their faces and all that, and all the action lines. So now I guess actually I want to start with you in this one, Chris, because I want to talk about how you guys found your way into doing technical drawings. And I read for you, Chris, that was actually connected to Star Trek as a teenager. I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, I used to go to this mall with my grandmother almost weekly. And when I was 14, 15 years old, she would be shopping and she would let me slip away to the B. Dalton bookstore. And the B. Dalton bookstore had this packet of Franz Joseph Star Trek blueprints. And it got to the point where the manager of the store just saw me coming like every week, just saw me coming, just saw me coming, just saw me coming. I would beeline to I didn't have the money to buy them myself. So every week I would try to like look at a different blueprint and soak it all in. And I probably misused a lot of other people's blueprints, but that same grandmother went into the bookstore one day and said, I know my grandson comes in here every week. And they were like, oh yeah, we know that kid. And she says, you need to buy him some of these so he can leave them alone. And that's what she did. And I was hooked specifically from a Star Trek perspective. I was hooked right on from that point. To me, seeing those blueprints and knowing that someone took the time to actually fathom out the interior to such detail, to me was the hook, and we're all about what's inside, right? We take something that's very complicated and try to show you everything that's inside. Although our work is in one illustration versus say 12 blueprints or something. So yeah, that was it for me.
Now, for you, Matt, I mean, again, you're 10 years younger, more or less here. So, like, you're about probably 5 or whatever when this is happening to your brother. So, when do you start finding your way into technical drawing? Is that because you're seeing him do some stuff, or does this happen much later for you in life?
I do. So I would say my first introduction to it was we have this industrial arts competition in high school, and I'm sure everyone who grew up in the 70s and 80s when it was really strong remembers it. And Chris did a cutaway of a Boeing 747 for his high school industrial arts competition, and I remember that. Maybe filed that away, but I by the time I got to middle school, I signed up for drafting. I think I had an architectural class in 8th grade, and then I had mechanical engineering all through high school, 9 through 12th. And I think 12th was actually architecture. And I just ate that stuff up kind of. I liked drawing board stuff. And I eventually, my junior year, sort of copied one of Chris's engine cutaways he did. Because by that time, he was already working in Detroit as a full-time cutaway artist. And except the way I copied his engine was with proportional dividers, which you can upscale a drawing by changing the pivot point in relationship to the length of your scissors, so to speak, your caliper. And the teacher thought I was crazy, but I didn't want to just copy it, like I didn't want to trace it or in that fashion. I wanted to see if I could I wanted to figure out how he did it, in a way too. So that was my first, I would say, cutaway in high school, and he had gone to Ferris State University, which had one of the best technical illustration programs in the country. There weren't many schools in the country that were offering it. A couple schools other than Ferris, and by the time I graduated high school, just made the most sense to me. So I went right into doing technical illustration in college. So just serendipitously followed the same path. My teachers, actually, one of my teachers was one of Chris's classmates when he went. And then Chris's professor, who was retired, would always show up in class just to hang out. Just this old guy who would just walk around each, as if he were still a professor. And so I still got kind of got his, advice. And incidentally, I think also it's worth mentioning that old professor who retired that Chris had worked with Ralph McQuarrie at Boeing. So there's sort of an arc there.
Yeah, John. I think his name was John James, and if I'm not incorrect, you also had Richard Mall in high school, right?
Yeah.
We both really had teachers that really engendered a lot of stuff in us as well. Like I don't think you could underscore that enough. That the right teachers can really take someone's interest and really hone it, So yeah, it was great.
That's very true. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of like my art school experience, where you have some teachers who are very much like letting you do your thing and working with you to help get wherever it is you want to go. And then there's others who are coming back to you and they want you to do it their way. So, was that like an experience that either you guys had? Like, was it more so for you were able to be free and explore, or did you have the teachers that were kind of like pressuring you to do it their way?
Well, high school, Richard Mall let you just do what you wanted to do. I mean, he wanted to know about it first. And John James was a great teacher at Ferris. There was another professor I had. I don't know if Matt had him at all. His name was Doug Farnham. Doug and John were the two teachers of that curriculum when I went, and Doug was that guy. He was just, man, you could not get 100% on anything in his class. Like he just and if he didn't authorize you to do it, then it wasn't something that you should be doing, And he got a lot of flack from that. The students were always going to the dean because of him, where John was such the opposite, So yeah,
I remember Mr. Mall, our high school drafting teacher, taught me. I mean, he was a younger guy with Chris, but I'm sure he was kind of the same, but he just a little humility. He let you do things that you wanted to do, but he also had standards. And I remember both Mr. Mall and the two teachers I had at college. I was not to boast, but I was one of the better students in class. And so they really enjoyed knocking me down and with a smile, and Mr. Mall was like that. He was like, "Oh, this is a great job, but oh, look what you did here," with a big smile. And it would always irk me because I didn't want to be the kid, the guy that had, So how they taught was, I thought, pretty nice, and
yeah.
Gave you a sense of humility in the process.
Can we swear here?
Go for it.
Okay, so Mr. James, Matt was very correct. Mr. James picked on me relentlessly. And he would stop by my desk, and he very loudly one day stopped by my desk. I was trying to draw an icosahedron, a 20-sided ball.
A soccer ball.
A soccer ball, exactly. And he goes, "You're on your back again, Cushman." And I was like, "Pardon?" And he goes, "You're totally fucking up." and And it wasn't done for me. It was done for the rest of the room who just howled relentlessly, So, but I knew that he appreciated me, so I would laugh right along with it. But it was it was something else. Yeah.
And it sounds like overall good experiences. And for you, Chris, I know not too long after you then went into technical illustration and started doing some industrial design stuff. And that eventually did tie into Star Trek through working with David Kimble. So can you kind of walk us through the process of how you ended up meeting Kimble and how that ultimately became a pretty life-changing moment for you?
Well, I mean, David Kimble was life-changing for me in the same way that Franz Joseph was life-changing for me. I went to the premiere of the motion picture in '79 in Grand Rapids, and they were selling his Cutaway poster in the lobby. And I was like, oh my God, like it was all the money I had left in my pocket. And I was going to spend every dime of it on that poster. There was just no way I was walking out. In fact, I may have had to borrow $5 from a classmate. So I was already a David Kimble fan. And, when I went to Detroit, I didn't start off doing cutaways. I just started off doing like production line manuals and assembly guides and, all things automotive. And Star Trek The Next Generation came on the air in '87. And then maybe in the second year, the episode of Next Gen where the space entity life form is sucking on the back of the Enterprise D and causing all sorts of chaos and pandemonium, and Geordi's trying to explain to everybody, and he had this graphic of the Enterprise D on the screen, and I thought, oh my God, I need to take a picture of that because that's like a Rosetta Stone for me on where at least engineering was, And so I said, I'm going to do a Dave Kimble, and I just did it for me. I didn't think it would go anywhere, and I had the first pencil drawn, and then one day I was on an assignment to Cadillac Motors, and I'm sitting in the lobby, and this Dave Kimble was a big guy. He's a large framed human, and he came in with another person, and he said, "My name's David Kimble," as if the receptionist thought it should matter to her. Like he had a sense of himself that was interesting, and it was lost on her, but it wasn't lost on me. I leapt out of my seat, and I was like, no way am I letting this guy leave the lobby without talking to him. And from there, he stopped by my actual desk at the GM Tech Center the next day, and all of the people that I worked for knew who David Kimble was because he had been there before. He'd done a lot of work for Corvette and other GM cars, and they were all like, "Why is Cushman getting so much attention from David Kimble?" And I showed him my Enterprise, and I said, "This would make a great poster," and he goes, "Yeah, it would make a great poster." And he actually, gave me some names and numbers to call and kind of got me started. And at the same time, he started giving me freelance work. I drew cars for him. I drew Acura. We did the
Dodge Viper.
No, that was a different company, and a little bit later on. But
Mercedes.
No, he painted the Dodge Viper. But I did the line work through another company.
Yeah.
And he paid really, really well, but his deadlines were insane. Like, I didn't sleep when working for David Kimble. Like, literally, I could go a week without never, with 2-hour naps. And that's all I would get, But he paid exceedingly well. I did a impact wrench for Ingersoll Rand for him that literally the FedEx package came one day and it went out the next day, like a complete drawing and inking on Mylar. So a pencil drawing and an inking on Mylar in one night. But it paid like $1,500, which in 1992 money was, you were doing good. So yeah, it's pretty. He was a pretty cool guy to work for. He's still around.
Oh, shout out to David Kimble. And
Yeah.
let's talk actually, if you don't mind, a little bit more about the Enterprise drawing, because this is now your first time working with Paramount. So I'd like to hear what it's like working with them, and basically getting to be a fan while being paid to do it.
Well, on the Enterprise D, I didn't have as much contact with them. The person that reviewed my drawing was Mike Akuda, and all of the documents that were sent to me and notes and red line markups. He sent a copy of my drawing back to me with red all over the drawing. That was Mike Akuda, but we never really talked, like physically talked. They sent me a 3-inch binder, which in my mind, because of the illustrations that were in that binder, was the material that was being distilled down into the Next Generation Technical Manual. So a lot of that information was in there. It just was on individually Xeroxed sheets. So that was my first foray with Paramount. I had hired someone to license the product, which was, not a great story in the end, but it got done. This thing that I had started for myself, just for the love of it, got done, got made into a poster, and a very popular poster. And honestly, I think the more you can get something done and show to somebody that it's a product, the more they will buy into doing something with it, So that was one of the big lessons then. When we got to SciPub Tech to do all the other posters that we did, we had a lot more interaction with the people. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to come back to those in a little bit, but I do want to ask a little bit more about the Enterprise, and in particular, I know that it was like kind of the poster that was like one of the most well-known things for TNG at the time, and to this day, it's still available. You can still find it in places. But the question, I guess, is whether or not they're actually like legally owning the rights to sell it or not. So I think that's kind of my question, because I heard that for you, that Enterprise poster was also kind of a giant headache in a lot of ways.
The poster itself wasn't a headache. The lady who had licensed it was turned out, when you like the first run of the poster, the largest version of the poster, 48 by 24, I think. I may have those measurements wrong. She ran 100,000 posters in one throw in Chicago, and then she did a smaller poster, which was 36 by
24 by 36.
24 by 36. And then she ran a third poster that had no call outs on it. And she got some artist to create this space background. And I thought that was weird, but it sold copies. People liked that. And then she had it made into a puzzle, which I would still kill to get my own copy of that to this day. And, money was rolling into her company big time. I had proposed to her some Star Wars cutaways and did some drawings, and she was looking into that. Well, while she was looking into that, she was also looking into finding another artist to do those posters. At some point, she just stopped paying me my royalties. So we had to go to court. And, in the end, her biggest mistake was that her lawyer never bothered to ask any of the jurors if they were Star Trek fans. And they were. And they were really angry with her when they gave the verdict. And they actually gave me compensatory, which I didn't know that I had coming to me, because they were so upset about it. And then, typical story, literally the next day, there's registered mail at my door. Hi, I just went out of business and into bankruptcy. You get nothing. So I went from elated that I was going to get a pretty decent check to knowing that I would never see another dime again. So it went back to that labor of love is all I've really gotten from it. I mean, I did get paid some, but not what I was owed, right? Not what I had coming.
Yeah, that's the sad part of the story. And, like I said, I checked on Amazon, I checked on eBay, and I can see that poster is still for sale, but I assume none of those profits are going to you, are they?
None of them are going to me. And then the other thing that I know rankles both of us is that the Enterprise D poster and the Enterprise E poster were knocked off in Germany. And that's definitely not coming to us either. So
you can still buy the E poster in Germany, and it's all in German.
Yeah.
Actually, you can't buy it in America. You can't order it and have it shipped here. There's a devil in the detail there, in that I think they wouldn't dare try to sell it here. But I have a friend in Germany who used to live here. He's actually my daughter's godfather. And I asked him, hey, can you buy this and mail it to me? So it's on its way. So I'm going to see what the e-poster looks like up close in German, just to see what's, how it was printed. What does it say in the fine print? I'm curious as to. So,
all of it, as terrible as it was a good lesson for both of us. And when we went on to SciPub Tech, Matt's work involves a lot of lawyers in what he does every day. And so when we developed our contract with the next person at SciPub Tech, I think we protected ourselves a little bit more. We were a little bit more wary of what could happen and how greedy people can be, and then just to finish off the story, the artist had created a cutaway of the Millennium Falcon. And when she went bankrupt, so did the deal for using that drawing for the Millennium Falcon. And I actually saw it framed in a art supply store that I used to shop at a lot. And I said, "What is that from? Who did that?" And they told me who it was. And
wasn't it your Falcon?
No, it wasn't my Falcon. It was a.
I thought you took your pencil and had the guy finish it.
No, he had redrawn it, but it was virtually using the details were all the same, right? And I don't want to say who he is. He's still alive, and he just sold it at auction and got $23,000 for this painting of the Millennium Falcon. And okay, great, but I also found he had documented his entire process and how he had felt bad that she had gone out of business. But I thought that it was
poetic justice.
It was poetic justice, because that I did go on to do the first 3 cutaways for Star Wars that are out there. So at SciPub Tech, huh?
2.
We mean 2.
I did 1.
Yeah, between the two of us, we did 3.
Oh, yeah. Well, technically, you did the Snowspeeder and at in one poster, so maybe
that's true.
Yeah.
So, anyways, not to make this a Star Wars episode, but it just was funny how it turned back around, and I was able to snatch it back from her to some degree. Yeah, I never want to run into her in life again, ever. It wouldn't be a good thing.
I would say plagiarism is knocking off, and plagiarism has hit us several times in a lot of different ways. Back when Star Trek magazine came out in the 90s, if you remember that, really high-class magazine, they did the Fact Files, which that's when they brought in Ben Robinson to facilitate that, or I don't know what his role was in that. But I personally believe, I don't have absolute proof of this, that our cutaways were the impetus for the reason why the fact files were in that magazine, because or a combination of the fact that, Franz Joseph, Dave Kimble, Chris Cushman did this work, now me. There was a real call for it. So they added cutaway illustrations, little illustrations in these magazines. And I do know that the Enterprise E nacelle they had in one of the issues of the magazine was I did on the Enterprise E, I did the back end of the ship. Chris did the front end of the ship. So I did the engineering and the nacelles. Chris did the saucer and down to the deflector dish. And so Ben Robinson took my nacelle and just flipped it 90 degrees and put it in a fact file, and then I guess, another form of flattery, our work made it into the Haynes manual, where they just copied an illustrator over top of our e-poster. And so we made sure that we were given credit in the second printing of that book, but that was also handled by people who handled the fact file. So we run into it. It's a little discouraging, but I guess if there was a silver lining in anything, it's like if people like our work that much, if it's, if there's value to it, they're going to knock it off. So what can you do?
Trek Untold will return momentarily.
Trek Untold is sponsored by Triple Fiction Productions. Celebrating 15 years in business in 2023, TFP creates 3D printed Star Trek and sci-fi inspired items that fit into any collection. Whether you're a cosplayer who wants a Starfleet phaser, a Bajoran tricorder, or a Klingon dagger, or a toy collector looking for that special accessory or diorama to make your figures truly stand out, Triple Fiction Productions has exactly what you need. And for you figure fanatics, that includes products that are the perfect size for Galoob, Mego, Playmates, and everything in between. All products are 3D printed in the US, with new designs constantly being updated on their website. Repeat customers can sign up for TFP's loyalty program for free, where the more you order, the more discounts you receive. TFP also has a Pay What You Want section, where clearance or misprinted items are available at a discounted price. Best of all, every product can be shipped worldwide. As a special bonus for listeners of this show, Trek Untold has a special discount code just for you. Enter Untold10 at checkout for 10% off of all orders with no minimum purchase required. That's 10% off using Untold10. To see all of their products, head to triple-fictionproductions.net. Or to stay up to date on their newest products, find them on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Triple Fiction Productions, where something is only impossible until it happens.
Have you ever watched a YouTube video and said you wish you could do what they were doing? Whether it's the filming, the production, the editing. Maybe you listen to your favorite podcast and you wondered how they put that show together, how they got that great sound quality, what gear they use, how much does it cost to get started? Or maybe you checked out a video or read a book about one of your favorite entrepreneurs and it made you say, I want to live that life. I want to do what they do. Then check out my podcast, Toys and Tech of the Trade. I'm Rich Butler and I've been making podcasts for almost 2 decades, speaking with experts across all fields to get to the bottom of the hows and whys of their achievements. Each week I sit down with these amazing people who have carved their own path in life and share the gadgets, the gear, and the tech that they rely on to create their content, the methods that they use to run their business, and the habits and trends that are part of their daily routine and their way of life. And all of that, of course, gets put together to make them successful. We pull back the curtain on the process to help you understand what these people do differently so that you can draw inspiration and get ideas and be inspired so that you can take action today. This podcast is inspiring, educational, it's enlightening, And most of all, it's a lot of fun. I want you to join me on this journey so that you can use the tools and advice shared in this podcast to level up your business or creative endeavors, giving you all the tips, tactics, and tools so that you can transform what you're doing from a side hustle into a full-time lifestyle where you can collect a paycheck for doing what you love. Check out Toys and Tech of the Trade wherever you listen to podcasts, and check out the RageWorks Network at RageWorksNetwork.com for more info on this podcast and all of the many other great shows that we have on the RageWorks Podcast Network. That's Toys and Tech of the Trade, with some assembly required.
Matt, we haven't actually talked yet about how you got into doing the technical stuff with your brother. I mean, was the Enterprise E the first one you guys collaborated on together?
No. Well, Chris was dealing with his... Well, I was in college. Chris was, when I entered college, I think Chris was not quite realizing the drama that was about to unfold on his D. And I called him and said, hey, for my thesis, I need to, for a technical illustration, you have like a minor and a major thesis. I did a paintball gun for my minor, but for my major thesis, I called him and said, hey, I need to acquire reference and materials. And I figured you have probably a lot of reference for a car engine or something. Maybe I can do it a different angle, or an automobile. I was thinking of an engine, I think, at the time, because I didn't want to get too crazy. And he was just like, why do you want to do that? Everyone wants to do something. Everyone does that. Why don't you do something different? No one's ever done a cutaway of the original Enterprise in any great way. And I was like, yeah, I could do that. It sounds, sounds like a cool idea. Sounds manageable. It was a lot of work. Also as part of that project, the teachers gave you a little extra credit, or it helped your project if you had a consultant. So Chris, would be my guy. This is back in the day where, I did something and I would just run it through the blueprint machine and mail it to Chris. And then Chris would look at it and say, okay, he'd make a comment here and there. And then I would keep updating. To back up a little bit, after that phone call, that was, gearing up. That was my, during the first semester of my last year. And then we had winter break. And so we're all at mom and dad's for Christmas. And so Chris bought me a ATM Ertl model kit, and he brought his Polaroid with him. And he also, made a copy of, or lent me his Franz Joseph or blueprints. And because you had to have reference in order to do this, you just couldn't create it out of your head. That was part of the class. I mean, this kind of work, you're not just relied upon your own imagination for real world things. And so we had the same standard applied to, science fiction. So I had to use what was there. At the time, it was just Franz Joseph and ATM Ertl, and both of which are pretty horrid to work with in terms of how, they were created. The ATM Ertl model is not perfect in terms of angles, dimension. It's not bad, but it's not perfect. And then the Franz Joseph prints, there was a lot of liberty given. And no disrespect to Franz Joseph. I mean, he didn't really like Star Trek, but his daughter loved Star Trek, and he did those for his daughter. And I think it's a great, it's a great story in itself. And Gene Roddenberry liked him because they were he thought they could be marketed. So it did a lot to that. And, the animated series did a lot to keep Star Trek alive during the dark ages. But anyway, Chris, we took some photographs, picked a nice photograph, and I got going. right out of the gate in January after Christmas break, and I worked all the way until literally the day it was due. The night before it was due, I had to run my illustration to. I had to present it in a certain way, and it was large mylar, and so the college had. I don't know if you know what a stat camera is. Not many people will know what a stat camera is, but it's a stat camera is a wall camera. So basically, the two rooms. One room is the box of the camera. One room is the photo. What you're photographing side of the camera, and you could lay a large piece of work on a sliding wall, and it had a huge lens, and you could go into the camera side of the room, which was lit with red, and it only took black and white. There was no grayscale. It was just black and white sensitive film. And so I photographed my illustration on a using this big stat camera to bring it down to a manageable size that I could hand in. I remember doing that the day it was due, putting it on an illustration board, putting a sleeve over it, and handing it in. That's how things are usually. Nth hour. So that's got the whole ball rolling, and the whole thing behind Chris suggesting that too was, and again, he didn't know this drama with his D was going to come down the pipe, but it was, if this is good, maybe we can use this through my publisher to get it printed. It'll have to be redone, of course. And then the whole drama with the D came out, and we went through a period of about a year and a half of regrouping before Chris found Sci-Pub Tech interested in doing our work. And it was basically the flagship for Sci-Pub Tech, which got the whole ball rolling. And then Chris jumped in right away with the DS9. So that was his first project with Sci-Pub Tech. After those two were done, then we did the E.
So let's talk a little bit about the E, and I kind of want to get into the nitty gritty now of how you guys actually do your work, because I've talked to writers, and it's interesting hearing how writers will collaborate together, but I've rarely talked to artists or illustrators that work together in tandem. So, I guess we can use the Enterprise E as the example here, and whoever wants to kind of jump in and answer this one, feel free to. But, let's talk about how you guys actually make your illustrations. How do you begin? What's the process? And how are you two communicating and drawing these things together?
Well, I think, again, we met, I think, I want to believe it was Christmas. Yeah, we got some early, the earliest drawings, John Eves, top side, front, rear view of the Enterprise E. And, we simply glued them onto some foam core and built literally our own little foam core model of the Enterprise E.
Oh, that's really cool.
So, yeah, and it usually starts with a model. Sometimes it's a model that you can buy in the store, or one of these. You pick a view. You get a view that you think will satisfy being able to look at most of the stuff inside of it, and then you take a picture of it, and you can trace the outside of the model, and that kind of establishes your scale. And then you just start cutting into it, and these things are made up of pancakes decks. And so, Matt made the foam core model. We photographed it, picked the one that we liked, and then I did a drawing where I just did the outside of the model and an initial assessment of the decks that are on the inside. And then from there, we essentially split the drawing in two, literally cutting it with a scissors so that Matt's side and my side, at least at that moment, still fit perfectly together. And then Matt went to draw his side, and I went to draw my side, and we were, that the Enterprise E, we got to work with the art department folks pretty closely. It was through Federal Express still, fax machine.
I think you left out. I think you left out a step.
What step did I leave out?
I think didn't we when we came up with our view, and you probably presented that to the art department, didn't they go out of their way to get us a photograph of the filming miniature at that angle? And that's what we drew our.
Yeah. Now that you say it, yeah, for sure.
Because that's, if you look at our e-poster, I mean, it's the actual shell is the Enterprise E.
You're right.
We try to work that way for final. I mean, we can come up with concepts and stuff, but for the final illustrations, they're always of the shell, of the actual filming miniature.
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah, I'm sorry. I Reader's Digest it for us.
So. No, but Chris is right. He cut it in half. Once he got that, he also gave me, Chris just sort of became the project manager and said, here's the midsection MSD of the E that probably Mike or Doug created.
Doug.
For the movie. And here's how they, he drew in the structural struts in this way. They're kind of, the E is made up of a lot of diagonal struts that are integrated. And so Chris kind of created a primer, this is how I want this to look. You might have done a corridor section, and it was surprising how well they fit together. From a standards point of view.
They matched right back up within a millimeter of each other. Although Matt is beyond fastidious with his line work. And I don't know, which is the hardest pencil, an H or a B?
H.
H's are hard.
Okay, so Matt's an H pencil guy, and my drawings look like mid B pencil drawing. The paper is no longer white; it's kind of got a gray hue to it. And although they matched up, if you look at them, if you look at just the pencils put together, there's I'm way more just let's get it done. And Matt's like, let's make it perfect. So yeah. But it worked out. It matched within a millimeter, even with all that. So,
I'm curious to know, by the way, like how big do you guys work when you're doing your originals?
Well, the D was 77 inches across a pencil drawing.
Wow.
Matt, what was your E? The original pencil on your E? Or I mean, your original Enterprise.
I built when I got out of college, I bought a piece of plywood, a 4 by 8 foot piece of plywood, and I built a drawing table. I found a 7 foot. I had to cut it. It wasn't. I think it was 4 by 7 feet. 7 feet's 84 inches. And I found a T-square, a sliding T-square, mechanical T-square. I bought it new with the cables and everything, and the mat. The self-healing mat. So all my subsequent drawings for the original Enterprise were just under 7 feet. So 80 inches.
I mean, that's a pretty enormous workspace to have. And I know, like, for a lot of folks who might be listening, they don't necessarily draw or paint that big. They're probably working, 9 by 12 or 17 by 11 or whatever. But when you're working that big, I mean, that really is a skill, just to be able to kind of still maintain your proportions and not get lost in the size of things. Because I know, like, a lot of folks, for example, here's just a thing out there. If you're someone out there who draws a flat on a table, whatever you draw, it's at the bottom of the paper. It's going to probably be bigger than what's at the top of the paper just because of how you're working. So, I mean, for you guys working at that enormous scale, how do you actually maintain your proportions?
String. Literally string, nails, tacks. When the Enterprise D was on the pencil drawing board, you literally had to walk through a spider web of of string that I had a nail on the wall in the kitchen that went down and across the board to represent one of the vanishing points of that poster. And then another piece of string went down to the floorboard, in another room for the other vanishing line, so very old school.
Yeah, I would say that the size of our illustrations, the E wasn't that big.
No, smaller.
But I'm sure that my original Enterprise probably annoyed the publisher a little bit. Although back then they had ways of dealing with that. I think it would be safe to say that you can't, to do a hand illustration like that, you couldn't do it at that size, finding the one place left in the country to reproduce it in order to print it. Because nobody has stat cameras anymore. Nobody has. I mean, there are places that said, we're going to still do this. Film is never going to go away, but there are only going to be certain places in the country that are going to develop film. And there's probably a place in the country that can still do that stuff, but it's probably going to be more expensive. And now we can work virtually in that scale on the computer. It just doesn't, we're not limited by that, and you can
much easier.
You can set your vanishing point anywhere on an Illustrator file, and you're good as gold.
The guide for the size of the Enterprise D was drawing it so that my deck height would be 3/8 of an inch. So I'd have enough room in that 3/8 of an inch to draw the little rooms in each of the decks, because it's got 42 decks in the D, right? So I could only take 3/8 of an inch for a deck. Now in the Illustrator, it doesn't matter, because I can zoom into that deck and draw all manner of detail that I would never have been able to draw back in the day. So it's been very interesting both of us have crossed that divide from old school to the new way, right?
Now, as far as Star Trek goes too, I just want to ask you, what would you say would be the most complicated ship or Star Trek thing that you guys ever drew? Because I know you guys did DS9, you did Voyager, you did the Phoenix. So which of those things was probably the most difficult one for you two to handle?
Well, I have an answer to that, but it's not Star Trek. I don't think Star Trek is particularly hard to draw. Star Trek is there's a lot of continuity to Star Trek, and there's a lot of standards already set up for Star Trek. So, decks are typically horizontal. As long as you have enough reference, it's less of a matter of hard and more of a matter of time. Time is a big deal. You do perspective work for so long, it just, how to do it. And now, if I would say time is hard. When I do an illustration, when I think of fans, and I think of criticism, and I don't want to necessarily let someone down. Not that I should care about that. I do feel like when I do a drawing, I want someone to look at it. I want them to say, wow, he added that in there. That's cool. So maybe getting detail, like not leaving something out by accident, is a scary thing, or what have you. But I am currently drawing a ship right now that is, I think it really just comes down to time, but it's also been hard to try to figure out because it's a very convoluted ship, and no deck is in the same plane as the other deck, So every time you draw a deck, you've got to redraw everything in a different plane, a different perspective. And then you get to the next deck, and now everything is in a different plane, a different perspective. Because the way the gravity plates in the ship work, it's just, it doesn't have to be the straight across horizontal deck plane that you would expect in Star Trek, or Star Wars even. Those genres keep it simple, probably to make people understand it the best. It's easier to understand by the viewer.
Yeah, I don't think any of our drawings are that particularly hard. I think the Enterprise E threw a little bit of a challenge because the guys didn't want just a horizontal deck thing. They threw in a lot of diagonal structural supports into that ship, that kind of chopped it up and made some of the decision making a little bit harder. Believe it or not, the Enterprise E does separate, and that had to be drawn in there, even though we never ever saw it happen. It can happen, and it is in our illustration, but it's not hard. But literally, I think if there's anything to appreciate what we do, is the amount of hours of our lives that go into each one of these drawings is really, really super incredible. I mean, we have spent thousands and thousands of hours over the years doing these drawings, and that has a cost. And again, that's where labor of love comes in. Even if we're getting paid, that still figures in. The labor of love still figures in, because we're not going to let any fan down. I'm a big believer in verisimilitude. The canon of it all, the exactness of it all. When we got commentary by the art department and the licensing department at Paramount, they were like, no, you can't do that. It has to be like this because A, B, and C. So for the longest time, there was from the time that Next Generation started until the end of Enterprise, the continuity of that show was pretty incredible. Not perfect, but it was pretty incredible, and these people really worked hard to maintain that. And so when we would do our drawings, we felt the same onus on us to do that as well, right? We just couldn't run off the reservation with our own ideas, although in all of our drawings have a lot of our own ideas in there, because not everything that we show parts of the ship that have never been on TV, but you wouldn't know it because, we've gone through the Starfleet technology school of hard knocks.
Like the kind of thing too with the whole idea of time as well. I think a lot of folks maybe don't appreciate time, and we're talking how long it takes for a drawing to be finished from point A to point B. But I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand also the type of training you guys went through, because you're also paying for that expertise and that professional knowledge. That means that, yeah, it might take you 1,000 hours to do like a ship, just off the top of my head, not saying that is, but it might take you X amount of hours, but it's also not factoring in the fact that you've had years of practice before then that mean that it only takes you this much amount of time, versus if I tried to do it, it would probably take me 7 times the amount of time to do like what you do, because I got to learn all the stuff you already know. So, it's always one of those things that I see fans will say like, oh, how long did it take you? But it's such a broader, bigger picture thing too than just the immediacy of drawing what you did. And, that kind of leads me to my next question here. So we were talking earlier about how you guys have now moved into like doing Illustrator and you're working digitally nowadays. And earlier we talked about plagiarism and that kind of problem. So, I know for a fact my logo for this podcast, I've actually seen on the I'veBeenTrained.com website. So I know like my logo is being used by AI to help train it. So, for you guys now in this digital realm, what quality of life improvements have you seen that have made things easier, or I shouldn't say easier, but maybe have expedited your artistic process? And what things today have made it scary, perhaps, or more challenging to work with?
For me, I've only just recently moved into the digital. Matt really has kind of cut that. I grew up in Adobe Photoshop. Matt grew up in Adobe Illustrator. So yeah, he's sort of cut all the ground for us on that.
Yeah. I got a head start on Illustrator back in the 90s. And by the time I went on my own, meaning I left my corporate job, I had a pretty good understanding of Illustrator, but it was through my corporate work, or I'm sorry, it's through my company work. The company I own does a lot of technical illustration work. I really learned a lot of muscle memory, a lot of aspects about Illustrator that maybe some people don't understand or they're not familiar with all the time. It kind of got me in a good place to apply it to Cutaway. So when I started my business, I sort of took a break from Cutaway. I was working for local companies, getting my business off the ground. And our publisher, SciPub Tech, was sort of wanting to retire in a way. It was a good opportunity to just start focusing on my business. I think it was later on, couple things, the Star Trek market was kind of void of quality materials. I mean, plush toys and pizza cutters and cats of Star Trek calendars can only go so far. That tied into the JJ Prize era. Chris said, "Hey, we should do this ship for the." It was sort of talked about after the movie came out, the first JJ Prize movie, Star Trek. Chris had, bought a toy. He says, "Look, we can use this." And I said, "Well, it kind of fizzled out basically, but they were coming out with another movie." And I said, "Well, they're going to have more sets." I think what kept us from doing it was they didn't have enough material, I think, from the first movie. And the second movie, I thought, well, they're going to have more sets. They're going to have more to this ship. And then I started, I reached out to Paramount or CBS and said, we'd be interested in doing this. And what happened was, there was a paradigm shift in how you guys, how CBS did work with people like us. It was hard to get in contact with people. It was hard to talk to people. It's hard to get your ideas across. I'm digressing here a little bit, but it's a fun story. JJ didn't want to share material about the new movie for us to make a composite cutaway of the new Enterprise. Anyway, the guy in charge of licensing at the time, I think his name was CJ Phillips or CJ Pierce. Can't remember. I think that's his name. He goes, "I love this work. This is awesome." Because I showed him all my art. I just sort of gave him, he knew who we were. He knew of our work handed down from previous licensed people at CBS, Paramount. And he goes, would you guys consider rebranding your older work? And it was at that point that I was primed with this void of stuff in the Star Trek world in terms of marketing. There was really not much being marketed and being done. And I said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And it just kind of got the thought patterns going. And I thought, what? I'm going to redo my original Enterprise. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't care. It was 2012, 11. And I took 4 years redrawing my original Enterprise, except now, halfway through that process, I was using blueprints that my friend Gary Kerr gave me from the Trial and Tribulations DS9 episode, where Greg Jean made that Enterprise model for that episode. And now I have that data to help I can change the proportions and make sure my Enterprise is more accurate. Halfway through that process, Chris emails me or calls me and says, "Hey, they're restoring the Enterprise again for the Smithsonian. You should talk to this lady, Dr. Margaret Whittekamp at the Smithsonian." And so anyway, I felt like my self-education and my progress with Illustrator up to that point was primed, and getting back to time, I probably have 4,000 hours in that rendition, but I didn't have any deadline, except I think my deadline became the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. I want to get this done before I go to Washington to celebrate alongside everyone else. And so that illustration's 11 feet in illustration. It's 11-foot illustration. It's 11 foot in Illustrator, and it's just short of 11 foot in Photoshop at 300 DPI. So you can imagine the size of that file. So RAM is key for those things. So sorry, that was a long, but I think it was the JJ Prize era that got me motivated, and the suggestion made by CBS, would you be willing to rebrand your work? Which I thought was a neat idea. I'm always about, Leonardo da Vinci doesn't have a huge body of work in terms of final paintings, but what he did was he spent years, almost decades, on one piece, on perfecting on one piece of work throughout. He would move from this piece to this piece, perfecting it before he said it was done. It wasn't one of those things where he drew a picture and he said, "This is done." So like the Mona Lisa didn't happen overnight. He took years doing that because he would go back to it and say, "I can do this better. I would make this better." I recommend getting the biography of Leonardo da Vinci. The famous biographer, I forgot his name, came out with the last 5-10 years ago or 10 years ago maybe. It talks about that process, and I don't want to emulate Leonardo da Vinci per se. I mean, I like Leonardo da Vinci stuff, but I just thought, why can't I do that with my work? And maybe in 20 years I could see perfecting it again. So anyway.
All right. So I know, as we come to a close of this interview here today, everyone always asks about advice for aspiring artists, but I'd rather ask you guys, what's something that today that you wish you knew about drawing or technical illustration, or anything in this realm of the profession that you're in, that you wish you knew when you first started? And I'm going to start with you, Chris.
I think I wish I had known quite a bit more about the business side of it. I think artists do a great job of being creative and can, do what they do, but artists generally don't necessarily make the best business people. And there's a great deal of business that goes into running, doing what you do. You just can't draw it. There are contracts, taxes, all kinds of things that you need to take into consideration. And I think, someone should learn that right up front.
How about you, Matt?
I think what's important to know or to understand, that I think is hard for a young person to understand sometimes, is there's always someone who's going to know more about the subject you're working on than you, and seek those people out. By seeking those people out, you gain traction, some support. The sci-fi community is very supportive, and it's amazing what you can find out and to improve upon your own endeavor.
I think I would add, and I think I've already mentioned this with the Enterprise D. There's literally no difference between my drawing the Enterprise D and the movie Field of Dreams. Literally build it and they will come. You know, like, don't wait for anybody to get permission to do it. Just do it because you love it. And if it's great, it'll become something.
Very good lesson there. So as we wrap up now for realsies, I'm going to give you guys the last question I ask all my guests. I'll start with you, Matt. What is the best thing about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
Well, right now, I would say the best thing is, and I think we need it more now than ever, is Gene Roddenberry had a very positive outlook on the future. And I think we live in a world where the future doesn't look very positive. And I think there's a lesson to be learned in that. My hope is that we end up with a world that Gene kind of created and thought of, and I think we need it. So I like the positive future. The non-dystopian aspect of Star Trek. It's what we need more than ever right now.
And how about you, Chris? What's the best thing for you about being a part of the Star Trek universe?
You know, literally meeting all kinds of people, from people who were involved in the show to the fans. That, you know, that's really been an incredible experience. You know, getting to know your heroes and just all the fan appreciation that we've received over the years has just been phenomenal. And that's, you know, that's a blessing in and of itself. You know, that's in many ways payment enough for what we do. Right. So.
All right. Well, that's awesome, you guys. And, I want to thank you again for both joining me today for this episode. You know, I feel like your artwork is one of those things where it's like everybody knows it, but not a lot of folks necessarily know the names behind it. And I'm happy that we got to educate a lot of folks, tell them your stories, tell them what you do and how you do it. Because what you guys do is so different and so unique. And, you know, I've seen those posters everywhere. Honestly, I'm really excited to talk to you guys because I've seen the Enterprise D. I've seen that fat D, as Riker called it. And it's so cool now to put, you know, a face behind the artistry in there because, yeah, I love what you guys do. And I really would love to see you guys handle like Strange New World, to do some cutaways for like any of the new Star Trek shows. So Paramount, can we make it happen? Would you guys do that if Paramount came out to you and said, hey, we want you guys to do the Discovery? Would you take that job? You
know, I wouldn't mind drawing the Stargazer or the Titan.
I'd like to see that. Yeah.
I really love Picard season 3, one episode in, and I'm like hooked already.
Yes.
Like I was blown out of my socks.
So Cushman Bros do the Titan. I'm up for that one.
All right.
All right. Well, the fabulous Cushman brothers, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
That's it for this week's episode of Trek Untold. Until next time, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Trek Untold, all one word. If you'd like to directly support this podcast, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter over on patreon.com/TrekUntold, which gives you access to some great perks that can't be beat. Or pick up some merchandise from our store, or use my Amazon shop link to check out all kinds of different Star Trek merchandise. Links for all these things are in the show notes. Shout out to Triple Fiction Productions for being a key sponsor of Trek Untold. Don't forget to check them out and all of the fine folks whose ads you've seen or heard on this podcast too. If you have any questions, feedback, or comments for the show, or would like to suggest a guest or discuss sponsorship options for any of these episodes in the future, send me a message at trekuntold@gmail.com. I hope to see you here again as we uncover more untold stories from Star Trek and beyond, and get to know even more amazing people who have contributed to this ever-expanding universe. Until next time, I'm Matthew Kaplowitz, and remember, fortune favors the bold.
Trek Untold is sponsored by TrekSphere.com, promoting fan-produced Star Trek content in all forms, is powered by the Rageworks podcasting network, and is affiliated with Nerd News Today.